Hello, everyone, and welcome to our summit. You are not your trauma. Break free from the past, rapidly heal negative patterns, and finally step into your calm, authentic, and lovable self. I am your host, Genevieve Solomon, and I am thrilled to introduce you to our guest today, Dr. Siegmar Gerken. Dr. Gerken taught on the faculty of JFK University Somatic Psychology Department in Santa Barbara Graduate Institute, the Esalen Institute, and the Behavioral Therapy Training Institute in Hamburg. He has studied psychology, education, and anthropology. He teaches at universities and private institutes worldwide on the interconnectedness of psychosomatic processes as they manifest on the levels of body, emotions, mind, will, and consciousness. His research in energy field documentation with Professor F. Pop on psycho-emotional states opened new horizons to scientists and practitioners. Dr. Gerken created the specialized core evolution trauma trainings, addressing the integration of unresolved stress patterns and developmental, shock, family, generational, and collective trauma. He also established the International Institute for Energy and Consciousness, applied mindfulness in psychology, spirituality and science, which also includes the energy, love, and consciousness programs. He connects with the essence within and the knowledge of the larger existence. Welcome, Siegmar.
That's a lot. Yeah. Thank you for the introduction. Right. Yeah.
A long, illustrious career. I mean, you've been studying and treating trauma for over 40 years, right?
I am.
Yeah.
If not even 50. So.
Okay. Wow. Well, I am so honored to have you on with such a extensive expertise in all the types of trauma. And I think you are the perfect person to tell us about, the term trauma. It is so widely used. And what do we really understand about trauma now?
That, I think, is a good beginning, because these days it is really in so many fields mentioned. And well, in the medical world, trauma is often more defined in its Greek original meaning, like a wound, an accident, or like an injury. But then in the world that we work in of humanistic sciences like psychology or psychotherapy or social work and others, we describe trauma as an emotional shock, a negative, stressful event that is perceived as overwhelming or even life-threatening for a person's system. That means it has an impact that cannot anymore be easily energetically or emotionally or mentally conceptually be integrated. Mm-hmm. And therefore stays as a chronic and often overwhelming stress pattern in our body-mind system. So which later then can lead to psychosomatic and chronic pain issues, as well, of course, our emotions and feelings and thinking capacity, and with that, our overall behavior. So how we feel safe and joyful and trusting in the world is all influenced by how do we integrate the trauma. And when we then look at the term trauma, we have now so many differentiated levels. And I may address here, of course, developmental trauma, which of course includes your early childhood, from intrauterine, sometimes also with the birth trauma, and all the different moments in your early years that can lead to restriction then of your free flow of life energy. Let's give it that big term. And then, of course, we have shock traumas. That means one-time events that have a stressful impact on your system, like a momentary loss, an accident or attack, and other moments like that, And of course, we all know the parental or family trauma. And I don't need to go into that. That is what we all do in psychotherapy. But we got to see these days also the generational and transgenerational trauma. That means when we become aware of when the trauma of former generations is carried over into the next generation,
Is that different than the family trauma, the transgenerational?
That can, yeah. I mean, family trauma and generational trauma can be very overlapping, go hand in hand, because your mother and father have certain moments that they had from their parents and so on. For instance, I had been in Germany, I'm German and American. So, of course, the whole situation from 2 world wars were carrying over into their generation. And of course, luckily, I'm shortly born after the war. So I had another opportunity, for a new beginning. But still, they carried their traumata from their experiences. And that's where we these days, we also talk about the field of collective trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we said the many further differentiations that we are all in, from environmental trauma, racial trauma, and or nature events, or man-made traumas. Like you may have volcano eruptions these days, as we see, or earthquakes, or also Fukushima, man-made traumas, So when in 2010, I gave a lot of workshops also in South America, also trauma workshops, And I just arrived in Santiago, Chile, when the earthquake of 7.2 was happening there. So it changed my whole program and immediately offered trauma integration seminars to the citizens, I mean, who's interested in that can read more about the detail of this work I did then with the population on the website of coevolution.com. Mm-hmm. So with that, we got to see that the fabric of life is woven by all our experiences. And in general, we are built and wired to deal with many of them, mm-hmm. so that we can stay in the flow of life. But some adverse reactions and situations lead us to protect, contract, compensate, to split off or dissociate, or just shut down. And when these conditions cannot be anymore be integrated into harmonious flow, then they can lead to a chronic traumatic stress, as we call it. And that leads ultimately then to post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress disorder, and can lead to a state that I call in coevolution a frozen pattern of history. And these patterns then manifest on the emotional, on the somatic, and on the cognitive level of our life. And with that, of course, limit our capacity for harmonious self-regulation, secure attachment, mm-hmm. deep contact with ourselves, and to the natural free expression of our life. I mean, that's what we will talk about, I think, today, the natural free expression of our life force.
Yeah, I was just having a question there when you were talking about that, is why are there so many of us who have had trouble, are having trouble integrating those things? Are we missing a basic skill in our society and with our families that would allow us to just know how to do that?
There, of course, we got to look at the different levels of traumas and how they affect the recovery or the healing. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's a huge topic, and that would be the whole online seminar that I will offer in March, Okay. But as I mentioned before, every level of our body-mind system can be affected. Mm-hmm. And it also depends on if it's a one-time, a multiple, a long-lasting, a repeated situation. Then your reaction, of course, also depends strongly what you asked for on your personal condition and on your resources. And maybe we come back to this later, to topic of resources. Because not everybody may have reacted the same in your family or does in the same family. We see with 3 children, there are 3 different reactions sometimes, you know. So it really depends on, that's why we have to look at the individual situation always, you know, because it really depends on where in the spectrum of your fight, flight, or freeze response you had been successful or not. And these days, we also know that fight, flight, and freeze, it sounds so easy, but we are dealing with a whole complexity of conditions that a trauma can bring. And that means with all the shades in between. First, of course, we got to explore the physical and the emotional level. That means, how did my body react in the event or to the event? And could I release the tension again? Has it been a moment and I can come back to reality and I can release the tension again? Or how can I build up strength again in my muscles or in areas that feel weak or collapsed in that incident? Some people feel I will never get my power back. I don't know how to, you know.
In the case,
go ahead.
In the case of the earthquake survivors, you were treating them so quickly. Was that an easier trauma intervention then, to have, you know, a shock and then so quickly finding the place in the body that needed to relax?
Absolutely. So I offered a 5-hour workshop. I mean, maybe I go briefly into that you can see it, to see all the levels that we worked through, and I may explain them a little more in depth for the people here who are maybe from the field of wanting to learn for themselves or for the professional understanding. So directly after the earthquake, which happened in the morning, 8 o'clock, you know, so, and I live in California, so I felt, well, what was that, you know? But it was very strong. And I went down into the hotel and people were lying under the tables with their hands over their head and so on and so on. And then I only said, boy, I better stay low. I don't go into the upper floors here anymore. But then at lunch, all cafes were full and you couldn't believe the sound, because people were sitting outside, you know. February, it was summer in Chile. It was, everybody almost spoke as loud as they could and shared. And that was a discharge. That was already good, you know. But then when I offered the 5-day workshop, and that got sponsored by a pharmaceutical company who didn't want to mention that was their name, that was fantastic. But then they had to lead me from their own building that got shattered by the earthquake and had cracks to a hotel downtown. So with several changes of times and places, still we were 70 to 80 people coming together. And then I began just doing the regular work, from slowly arriving in your body with breathing exercises, which I may do it at the end. Left, right brain hemisphere exercises to get that overwhelm of stress. Then, of course, we got to see what is sharing. If you would like to share what you have experienced, not so much what has happened, then what was your experience in it, you know? Then you could do that in groups of 4. And then I let them also have a technique that I say taking over. Let them lean just gently, so that you can feel, can I trust again? Can I trust again? Or do I lean, but everything in my body is holding stiff? You can lean against another person or against a pillow and feel extremely stiff. So what would it mean to accept, you know? So then people found some way, you know, maybe hold my hand or hold my head. So we were inviting them to find what would you need in this moment of experience, you know. And then, of course, after we went a little bit deeper, I had a friend who was a psychiatrist whom I asked to prepare images from the country, I mean, for the collective, regaining strength, and that's a condor, that's a snow-covered Andes and all these kind of things where Chileans are proud of, And it was just a beautiful moment coming together until they were singing at the end, gracias a la vida, so give thanks to life. Yeah. So this is, you can see that different levels need to be addressed, if you can do that. And in a workshop, you can. In individual work, we need to lead it little by little. And of course, everybody could come then out of it and feel that the healing has begun. Nevertheless, I mean, I went 3 times a year for my trainings, There was a woman in the training. She said, you know what, when we shared, wow, what's happening? I'm working in my garden again. And I said, wow. Because her first sharing was, I will never trust the earth again. Then, yeah, it's natural, it's natural, but how will you live on the earth if you don't trust it anymore? That means you are in chronic condition, constantly alert. So, and that's what we will talk about too, the chronic condition that results out of a traumatic experience, In that moment when she said, I'm planting flowers again, then I knew that also that level had been reached and allowed herself to surrender again to the situation.
So the first level is the body, and that includes the right and the left brain hemisphere. So is that then including the mind, the body and the mind? And then sharing the experiences, really just witnessing and giving voice, expressing your emotions and your experience. And then leaning against the other person is reestablishing trust.
That's an option. So we have
many
option. Techniques.
Right, yeah, some other way. Some way to reestablish trust.
Yeah.
And then the last is and ask for and accept support. And the last level is the gratitude.
That was the collective level.
Collective.
Coming back and feel, how can I make contact with my land, that we all suffered that, the whole nation suffered it, So how can we heal that trauma? You could call it a national trauma, and here the collective trauma, that's the whole population was in this experience, or a great part of Chile, So, and to bring back the pride, and with that, arriving again in your own land, in your own country, So that's the physical, emotional part, but I can give you a different experience where you can see where it's overlapping and we need to work in different layers. For instance, here a couple work to our practice here in Mendocino. And to come to Mendocino, the last 1.5 hours, you got to ride very curvy roads. So, and of course, when they arrived, they were already done, So she was at the end of the rope, and he was so agitated she constantly complaining about his driving, the voices raised. So for the onset for a couple session was not the best situation, but nevertheless, we do, So we begin and we regulate and coming back and arriving and so on. And then, of course, in the sharing of the time of life, it turns out that 6-7 years ago, she had a strong car accident where a car on the entrance of the freeway didn't see her and totally hit into her right side. And she was aware that since then, she was much more agitated, much more nervous about things she could not control, or when fast-moving things were passing by. She always had a startle like that, But they were only together for 3 years, so she didn't know about that. She totally forgot about that, as we do with accidents, And of course, now driving on the curves, she complained he's driving too close to the right side. She's driving too fast, and so on and so on. And he constantly feeling criticized in his manhood or whatever of perfect driving, etc., etc. So in that moment, then when people come for intensives here, I need to say, hey, you know what? Let me work with her here on a trauma situation, and you are the witness, so the partner can stay then, of course, in the room. So I worked purely then on the car accident trauma, which is a different work, of course, than psychotherapy. And so where we could integrate some of the total fear of dying, the fear of death, that moment of shock in the body, and so on and so on, you know, that can go for a half hour, 40 minutes. And at the end, where she can then release and also cry and feel the release in her body, and her partner witnessing it and understanding, gosh, it's not about me. It's about really that you are still need with every moment. I'm not maybe totally mindful. I sent you back in a shock situation, you know. So once they understood that, they could totally communicate differently, or they can decide she can drive or he drives especially careful. So at least from that moment on, we could continue then and the couple work without all that interfering into the behavior that they have with each other, you know, of overly caution and critique. So here you see in a different, what should I say, constellation, how we can work with that, you know, the emotional level of a traumatic experience, you know. How do you feel yourself in terms of joy, fear, mistrust, you know, anger or hate, acting out against yourself or against others, you know? And really the question, do you feel like your real self? Are you acting like your real self, or do you feel estranged from yourself and others, you know?
I guess that's easier to tell with shock trauma because you would have felt like yourself beforehand. But with developmental trauma, I wonder if people ever really feel like themselves.
Oh, yeah. Because we have a saying that says it's never too late to have a happy childhood. So
But I mean, yeah, without getting treatment, have you ever felt yourself? Or that question might be very difficult.
True. I mean,
do you feel like yourself? I don't know.
Yeah, if a trauma is known and can be formulated, of course, it's easier to safely address and process it. But often it is not known conceptually, as you described, you know. And present research pretty much underlines the importance of early non-verbal but embodied experiences. Therefore, working skillfully with the body is enormously rich, you know. Because there are parts of us that are non-verbal. They don't speak the language of the mind or the will, you know. And these parts then rely on a different type of contact and communication and presence in order to be heard. Often when we acknowledge them, the person often only needs awareness and mindfulness that they can reverse and unwind fixations, you know, from that time that they had created, you know. So that, of course, leads you to the question of conceptual integration. Because the discussion we have always, do I need to relive my traumatic event? No, not necessarily. But conceptual integration is important when we see that the person still lives in situations where similar traumas can reoccur. Then it's good to understand how and why they run into similar situation and risk again and again. So, and that can also be then developmental. You may feel always attracted to a man that later on turns out is alcoholic or abusive or situations, because you could not change your father, but you try to change this man, you know, and had the hopes and wishes and not seeing, wait a minute, what am I motivated by? and what is the nature of the person that I'm feeling attracted by.
Mm-hmm.
So that will then lead to different work, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like that, the beauty of that so much, because if you don't have a conceptual idea of your trauma, your life will tell you. It will tell you what it was.
Yeah.
You don't have to remember it, but your life is telling you what it was. Yeah.
And I must say, of course, depending on, like I said at the beginning, depending on your resources and your constitution.
Could you tell us that depending on your resources?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
What does that mean? How much energy you have for it? How much?
Yeah, that's also. let's say we differentiate your physical resources, So that means your body. Are you in shape? Are you in good shape? Are you healthy? Can you run? If you had a traumatic event because you couldn't run away, so maybe you would like to prepare your body. Do you feel extremely weak in a shock? Then it may be good to begin to prepare. So sometimes I have a client that says, I can't. Then what I usually don't do as a therapist, I say, you know what? It's really good if you begin fitness. You got to build up strength, muscle strength. So that they really have the feeling, oh, wow, I feel I can lift something, I can do something. So it gives you a whole different body feeling. It's not that I say, hey, fitness is great in general. Yeah, it's always good to stay fit, but how can you be mindful about your body, whether you do it with yoga, with running, whatever you do. But that means there is a physical resource. You will not exhaust after 20 yards, So that is one thing. Then another resource, of course, is your direct environment, practical safety. I learned in the trauma work that there's no technique for everybody. So what the best approach is that you want to better the life of the person. That's a basic sentence. And from here, we can begin and see what would that be, So that means if somebody had broken into your house, hey, do you have good locks? If not, begin there, make good locks. If you stopped in the middle of the night somewhere and was in panic because you had no gas in your tank, observe how is your car, how are the brakes. So very simple to avoid, to look out in the environmental situation, So are you streetwise, So my son, who grew up in Mendocino, very peaceful, when he was in college and went into the midnight, they go out and do their homework somewhere in a cafe. And on the other side, 3 other guys were coming up. The friend from LA immediately said, it's a gang, we got to get away here, And my son said, hey, there's 3 guys singing, So they have a good time. So that will also influence your situation, of course, Then after the incident, how much time is passed that you may have been supported, family, friends, and so on, So
do you recommend that some time pass, or do you recommend getting, if something happens, get treatment, get an intervention right away, or do you recommend some time pass?
As I said, there is no right thing. If you feel I'm not ready for it, but if you feel I would like not to work on my trauma, but I would like to have a normal feeling of life again, then absolutely, then I would say, yeah. One of the big topic in our work of coevolution, besides from the trauma work, is the pulsation of life. Because the pulsation of life gives us a criteria for your functioning, for your aliveness on every level. And I may come back to that breathing and all the other level, So I just had another example. it slips my mind right now, but
Right. You were
I
telling us
think I will
about,
come back. Yeah, I will
yeah,
come
you're
back to it.
okay.
When you ask me, is it for the time frame? Yeah. So in that respect, how much can you come back into your aliveness and how you see people? So that means if you had a car accident, and you call your partner or your husband, is that a car accident? And he says, how could you be so stupid to ruin our car, Or he says, honey, are you okay? Shall I come?
Mm-hmm.
Help. So there's a different support where you feel, wow, I'm received. I'm not needing to defend and protect myself against that,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these are easy examples to the situation I've gone through in South America, especially also in Colombia and Mexico and some there, where you can imagine that things are sometimes a little bit rougher and more critical.
Mm-hmm.
But there is always a question, yeah, if you can immediately take care of it, and that is where I will give you maybe some techniques at the end. So where you become aware, that was not easy. And let me see where it is right now. Let me observe my breathing, my muscle tension. I become aware in the moment. I cannot open that, but I know I need to take care of it. So at least you have that mental check, not go into self-criticism, self-observation, but into how do I feel in the flow of life?
Mm-hmm.
So in that respect, very often maybe you don't become aware unless you had very obvious traumatic situation, as you described, so from your.
Yeah, I know countless people that live their life with so much anxiety, such prolonged anxiety, so many years, decades of anxiety that they just believe that that's who they are. They're just an anxious person. So that question when you said, do you feel like yourself? That's the first thing I thought is, a lot of people really identify with their nervous system responses to trauma.
Yeah,
it becomes who they are.
exactly. Let's get to the nervous system response, but I don't want to go into too much detail of neuroscience, where that we need to also include, of course, here. So because the valuable brain research that we have in the last 10 to 15 years, that gave us a deeper understanding of how neurobiology influences and the brain chemistry, and how that can then be influenced by traumatic events, So the imbalance then of dopamine, serotonin, the activation then, as we know from the limbic system, it was called the feeling system, the amygdala in it, the so-called HPA axis. I don't want to make it too professional today, but where we at the end can see the serotonin, can be the cortisol level of the person. That means the stress hormone. And also we need cortisol for all functions in life, but when the level too high, then we know that the person is still in the stress situation, is still in the traumatic condition. So, but since we can measure this imbalance, then very often the conclusion is that we can remedy this imbalance with medication. So, and on the other hand, then we can also apply the same logic. If the brain chemistry is out of balance due to an emotional experience, then I can also influence the brain chemistry by leading the emotions to a harmonious integration. Unfortunately, that may take a little bit longer. Sometimes it happens instantly. So that's where we need to look at the approach when you talk about a lot of anxiety clients who identify then with the anxiety and fear then, of course, because the situation is still happening, So that's where we got to understand that the trauma is not just held in the brain, but in the whole body, mind system, and whole human system. which
Is it
brings,
sometimes helpful
yeah,
for people to take medication and then work on leading their emotions to harmonious
yeah,
integration?
yeah, absolutely. So because unless you're a psychiatrist, it's better you don't interfere with any medication.
Mhm.
And so I will say the experiential research that we did sometimes on congresses, coming together and saying, what's your experience with somebody who takes medication at the same time? We try to bring more aliveness into the body, which is almost a little bit counterproductive, you know.
Yeah, I'm curious too.
So in that is, yes, we bring more aliveness in to stabilize the person. Maybe I can back later to it with it. I call the matrix of grounding. So that gives again a sense of I'm back in my body. Because from that place, then the person may ask, you know what, I would like to take less medication. That the person can also then communicate to their practitioner. And from that place, then a good practitioner will also see and hear that the person is capable. And then we all see that all the work we had done in that period of time goes then almost like in quantum leaps. So that means there is a part that perceives new paths and new thinking, but cannot really react to it because of the medication and because of the transitional moment preparing the whole system to be independent of medication. But you cannot just let it drop, because how should a balance be occur? It has to be the body-mind system that supports the rebalancing of serotonin, dopamine, and all other hormonal conditions. You know, so no, in that respect, it's not bad. It's very important sometimes to work overlapping and bring that person to a strength and understanding. I think I can really be now on my own without medication, but that must be carefully evaluated, of course, you know. So here as I mentioned, when I talk about energy, you know, not just the brain, you know, I briefly touch here into a moment that's not so much talked about in general trauma work or in the field of psychology and medicine, and that is the electromagnetic field. We all know we have it. Medicine is using it and utilizing it. And we haven't advanced the research about that. I mean, I've done research in infrared analysis and biophoton measurement to document how we hold traumas in our body-mind field, you know, and what it can do. And what can we do to access this held energy so it can be integrated and come back into the flow, you know. So I could go into a whole keynote presentation about it, but we don't have the time for that today.
That's very fascinating, though. So you can physically observe the electromagnetic field through through the infrared and photonic measurement.
See, on one hand, the infrared is just an objective measurement of the streams of warmth radiation that you have, you know, the infrared radiation, so nothing spiritual, you know, it's not the aura or whatever. And in that, there are patterns that are also influenced by held energy, by physical energy, like a block, like a scar, or by what I call an emotional scar. Emotional scars are also scars, you know, and they hold the experience in time, like a regular scar, you know. So that's very interesting sometimes also in the trauma work or in normal therapy, or when I ask people to get a little bit into history without needing to into story, I ask them, do you have some scars? And sometimes they don't know it anymore, and immediately otherwise you have the story. Or this was this and that, or what were the circumstances? And you're in the middle of the story and you see their reaction in the body, how they express it, how they share about it, how much emotions are still activated, and more you can integrate it, some of that. And very often, and they say, I've never had anybody asking me for that, so, but it's very strong documentation of parts of your life, so.
And you mentioned earlier, you said, when you were talking about the earthquake survivors, and after that workshop, you said, and now the healing can begin.
What's that?
You said, and now the healing can begin. And I thought that is very true. It's like, really, once you recognize trauma and you set the intention to heal, it can be a very long process, and it has, like you said, many layers. And I suppose the feeling starts to decrease, and then you're encouraged to go deeper and deeper without the fear of continuing your healing process. Or does it just become more natural? Like you said earlier, like your natural healing process takes over at some point, and your body can just start to integrate naturally anything that shocks it?
Yeah, I almost would like to be a little more precise.
Please.
That means in that moment where the person decides to call you for a session, or comes into the workshop, or reads a sign, oh, there is a trauma integration work, there's already where the healing begins, So then that already the energy comes into motion. Then, of course, we support that intention. And that intention then leads into an opening of a physical, emotional, and possibly also mental system. That, when I mean then where the healing can begin, is another part in us. That's the essential being, what I have in the topic, beyond the trauma, live your essence, and that's what led us both together here, the title of the summit, You Are Not Your Trauma, So yes, of course, we need to work with it. It's like something in the way for the beautiful unfolding of who you are in your essence, And that's not so much, what shall I say, a spiritual dimension per se. It is, you come with an energy into this life that is yours. And of course, with a genetic makeup. And you are growing up in a certain family, in a certain society, in a certain religion, all the circumstances. That's why I see essence more as a process of unfolding, not something that is an essence and you carry that through. It's constantly in unfolding, and that gets enriched, of who you are. That's the beauty of it.
It is the beauty of it. And I love the way you say that, because I think some people are going, oh, I need to find myself. I need to find my essence. Yeah. And it's not, oh, I found it. I have it. It's just a relaxing into it, letting unfold. Yeah. It's a beautiful process of life.
So that's where the trauma, let's say, is processed. Then I would say now the real work can begin, because that is first out of the way, or you're aware about it and you know how to deal with it. Now, another question, because as you said, very often people identify consciously or unconsciously with what has happened, and they don't know how to move out of it. And that's, of course, it's good besides therapy and science that we do. From here, we reach into a transpersonal and to spiritual dimensions, So, and there, if you don't see the person in its journey of unfolding, as I describe sometimes, because I work also sometimes with behavioral therapists, who could work also, And so if somebody comes to me who had a claustrophobia, he doesn't want to go into the elevator anymore, so fear, panic, and so on, then who would I to say, it's only the elevator issue. We are in the big cosmos that, the guy would say, I go somewhere else, So, no, but I got to address where the person is and has that question in life, So I work with him on the issue, you know, what the fear is, how he can overcome it, and when he comes through it, so he can have a social life again. But in the same time, I hold the larger field of that person. That's the difference. If I'm only a trauma therapist, or am I a therapist that sees the wholeness of a person, and we work on the trauma, and we work on other issues. So then the person has a chance, after he's again in the elevator and moves out, to say, you know what, I feel there's something else I would like to expand into. That's, of course, the golden moment for us therapists, you know, where we say, yes, I'd love to support you in that, you know. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Would you like to lead us into a matrix of grounding or some breathing exercises? Your choice, but
yeah,
that sounded great to me.
Yeah, because of course I can go into a whole explanation about that, what we do in the training, you know, when we do that, or we do that in short workshops. Because a very important foundational work is the breathing. Because immediately after birth, we begin to become lung breathers. And often that's connected with our first crying, you know. And from that moment on, we regulate our feelings with our breathing, you know. So that's why it's so important, you know. And I don't need to go into a deep traumatic event to invite you to envision a moment, let's say, when you step under your shower too early and it's still cold water. So what do? What's your reaction? You know, you go, yeah, you have a startle, right? You have a startle, and under the warm shower, then you feel, I can relax again, you know. But if the startle came from a moment of shooting around you that you hear, not knowing what's going on and will it continue, and your system stays in the alertness, then it's exactly when you feel, and then imagine you would not come down anymore with your diaphragm, would not anymore expand the intercostal muscles in your chest, would not anymore let your trapezius go in your shoulders. Your neck would stay a little bit more ready. That under the shower, you can all again let go. But what is in such a situation, you know, because I have a little experience there too, like in so many years when I was in Central Oregon, gave a training there, and all of a sudden we had shooting around, you know, and most of them who in our training, we ducked under and held for a moment, whereas the local people had a moment and then said, oh, it's hunting season, you know. So what was a life threat for us was dinner for them, you know. So it's that how different. So of course we could let go. We did a breathing exercise again and looked at that. Wow, that's how the different reaction is. So in that moment, since online, I've been too careful to go into a large intensity, but what always helpful and can help in any moment is when you invite for a breathing where you simply count. To see somebody, let you say in anxiety, so breathing is short, you know, and flat, or you have a startle that you can't come out of. So you invite to count, let's say, to 2, you know, for the in-breath, you know, 1, 2, 1, 2, on the out-breath. 1, 2, 1. That's, of course, for the normal person, like for you, much too short. You feel, oh, wow, I meant, wait a minute, I don't get enough air, you know. But for them, it's an entrance into connecting, giving attention to their breathing. And attention to the breathing means I give attention to my body for that moment. And everybody, even person in anxiety, can direct their attention. We only got to invite them and give them something that they can do. So when you see 2 is possible, then you invite to 3. 1, 2, 3 in. 1, 2, 3 out. And even that may be a little bit short for you as a meditator and so on. But for a person who comes out of anxiety, that's the first moment of, oh, or get a little bit more oxygen in, there's a little bit more regulation happening, and without stress. So it's not about how good you are, how far can I go. Let yourself see whether you can expand to 4, So person may say, oh, that's a stretch. And okay, then let's stay with 3, And if you feel ready, and then you give homework and practice it at home, because it's a very simple thing you can take with you in any moment of the day when you encounter something. You sit on a red light, great exercise. Sit in a traffic jam. And see whether 4 or 5 is a good moment for you. Then let yourself be in that pattern for a moment, So the same could be if you put your hands on your knees. So when you want to do it with touch, lift up your right heel and breathe in. Or if you sit cross-legged, so then again bring it.
I am sitting cross-legged.
And bring it down on your out breath down. Take the left leg, left heel up, in, left leg down, right leg up, with your in-breath down. I see you already like being on a boat, That means we are working on the lateral overcharge, like the tension, from the left and right hemisphere balancing, that goes via the corpus callosum. And how much can we balance that? And in a very strong moment, we need to take care of that, so have a balance. From here then, with the legs, you may extend to the fingers. Press your right thumb toward your index finger and breathe out. Lift up then the thumb and press the left thumb down, breathing in. And again, the word da. It sounds so simple, But you know what? On every psychological convention, they sell you devices for $100 for that. You get a mini voltage, that, so you hold something in your hand. But you can use it simple, da, And you can do that without being seen. You can sit in a restaurant when before having feeling, gosh, I don't know whether I have a panic attack. Go back, press things, come back into regulation. So
That's
this
very helpful.
Yeah, these are very simple ones, So from here, of course, that's the breathing. We got to also attend to the movement and expression. That's where the whole body comes in. Because if you see your body and expression is frozen, then I need to understand if that is a personality trait. And for a long time, in childhood, whatever, then we need to address that later too. Or they have never been expressive, but now with a traumatic condition, they really stay and froze into the frozen pattern of history, as I described, And then we got to see how the story is held in this, So I remember the beautiful moment when I was teaching also in Australia. And there was an emergency driver. Not only by profession, she was constantly exposed to trauma and traumatization. For over 2 years, she was also stalked, I mean, the police could remedy that. So it was not fantasized. So it was actually also proven the person got into bars, behind bars, and so on, So, but she was still in that condition, So she reached the moment in the stress level where she was not anymore sure whether she could handle it, Since I had to fly out the same day, I asked her to come with her therapist, who was participating also in my training down under, so that she could continue to deepen the work afterwards, So otherwise I'd be very careful when I'm only there for one session, But after a good hour of work, breathing, practicing regulation, emotional processing, we reached a fairly integrated moment without the expression of fear, So I normalized our conversation to wrap up and just mentioned that I saw her before I went to the practice in her car with her eyes closed. And she said, yeah, since we met so early, I wanted to make sure I'm in time, and I came half hour early, And I said, so what did you do? Sleep, meditate, or listen to something? And she said, I was listening to some music I really like, and I envisioned to move to it. So here was an important sentence for me, So because she was stiff the whole session, not stiff, but hard to move, no joy, and so on. So I said, do you have the music with you? Oh yeah, I've made on my iPhone, So I said, can you play it? So she played the music, and since she mentioned to envision her move, I invited her to allow her body to lead her from wherever she would like to begin to move, to the music, And then little by little to stand up and use the whole room as an expression, And it was so, her therapist and I, we looked at each other and we observed the flow, and it was so beautiful. And so when we saw the flow, then I asked her if it would be okay that the therapist and I could join her in the movement, So we all danced and moved for 4 or 5 minutes, and moved freely until I called us back together in a circle, and we honored her tears about joy, that she had, And she said, for over 2 years, I did not allow myself to move and feel joy in my body, So that, of course, a deep reward that we see with skillful trauma work, and that can then extend into the voice, can then extend into personal dialogues with the voices you may have in you, or role play, constellation, whatever we choose, to bring integration back into the system. Ultimately, it should lead to self-empowerment and mindful presence, So that's because I know from my meditation work I do in Zen workshops and psychotherapy and so on in Europe, the healing from an attachment to trauma or to other things is not detachment. The healing from attachment is presence coming into me. And I don't know whether there's room for an exercise where I maybe complete the whole
thing. Sure.
So yeah. So I mean, first you asked me
cut it
about
up there.
gift. Yeah, you asked me about the gift, that I could give, and I give the $50 gift for the next collective generational family trauma online workshop that happens on March 19th, April 16th, and May 7th for 2.5 hours each. So you can see that on our website.
Is this for healing from or learning to help heal?
That always goes hand in hand, It's not a webinar, it's an interactive seminar, and you can come in as much as you want to, or you be there, listen, you learn, you can ask me professional question, you can ask me personal question. So that's why I like not to work in webinars, but in interactive seminars. It's the same with our training, which we also continue in February. If that is of interest to some people here, look up coevolution.com and see whether we have a global training for people from all over the world. And of course, a trauma training that's shorter. And we do individual work if you feel more safe with that at the beginning. So that's totally clear.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us, for the work that you do, for the teaching that you provide so other people can take your work and help others. Really, such a ripple effect of service. So thank you so much.
Yeah, giving me the last opportunity where I invite you to just again give one moment of attention to your breathing. And if you are used to meditation, you can go into it. If not, you can just stay with your eyes open, only in centered body. And let yourself expand your next out breath for 2-3 seconds. Out, out, out. So that your next in-breath wants to flow in naturally a little bit deeper. Expand it again. Take it in again. Now with your next out breath, let me invite you to guide the breathing and the energy of the breath through your whole body, belly, pelvis, into the legs, into your feet, to the ground. We can breathe in from the ground through your legs, coming into your body, to the top of your head. So it's the ebb and flow of the breathing that you can stay in, because what we did not touch today is the coherence, to establish a coherent field internally and externally. And you can sit in that state of the ebb and flow of your breathing as much you enjoy it, as much you have time. It's a core flow of breath. I thank you for the opportunity, and it's such a pleasure.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much. And I'm just quietly telling you all, since you're in a state of relaxation, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Genevieve.
We look forward to continuing the conversation of the healing journey and the many ways you can go from trauma recognition to creator of your reality. We will see you tomorrow. Have a beautiful day.
Enjoy life.
Yeah, you too.